This is why social justice activists ruin everything. They ruin every single franchise they infect. Because most of these people, besides the fact that they are raging bigots, they want to change the world. They want to fight for causes to improve humanity. But instead of going into the ghetto and giving some soup to the homeless or donating to charity, like normal things that normal people that legitimately want to help out do, they decide to, no. See, the way we're going to help minorities is by changing Dungeons and Dragons. Because there's probably a black woman with 4 kids in a trailer out there, and she is definitely going to benefit from me, the white guy, fighting on her behalf by changing Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to shame the creators of Dungeons and Dragons, make them understand the racism, and they're going to change their IP, and that's how we're going to fix the world. No, but seriously, imagine hiring a person that says this garbage in your company. Like, he's going to find everyone problematic, and he's going to do his best in order to get other people fired and replace them with his friends that think the same. So, for example, Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, they have done their utmost best to suck up to these people. They desexualize their female characters. They dress the wear women all the way up to the neck. They made absolutely sure they virtue signal and they talk about diversity and inclusion and all that. And once a company does this, once a company does something like this, it will never be enough. In fact, these people are like sharks that smell blood in the water. Now they understand that it is a company that's willing to listen to their vapid criticism. Like, notice how the environmentalists will never lecture China or lecture India about environmentalism because they know they don't have a chance. Like, the Chinese government is going to laugh them off. But if it's a country that might listen to them, then it's when they start pushing really hard their ideology. It's the same with companies. Like, if you're a company that tells these people to fuck off, like if you're a Japanese company that doesn't care about the criticism of the Western white man, they're not going to criticize it that much. But if you're a company that is willing to placate about these changes and you're starting to give all the far leftist dog whistles, that's when they're going to gangbang and that's when they're going to descend like vultures upon this. So apparently it's not okay because Dungeons and Dragons released their new definition for the new handbook where it describes what an orc is. And most orcs have been indoctrinated into a life of destruction and slaughter, but unlike creatures who by their very nature are evil, such as gnolls, it's possible that an orc, if raised outside its culture, could develop a limited capacity for empathy, love, and compassion. No matter how domesticated an orc might be, its blood just flows from beneath the surface. With its instinctive love of battle and its desire to prove strength, an orc trying to live with the confines of civilization is faced with a difficult task. And to this, apparently it's blatant racism. And now it's trending on Twitter. And obviously, if you read this definition of an orc, and literally the first thing that goes into your mind is, despite being 30% of the population, then you are the problem. Like, no, seriously, you are like you're like the Christians which would see Jesus in the asshole of a dog. Google it, it's a thing. Okay? You're literally that type of person. But let's talk a little bit about it. Is Dungeons and Dragons, and not just Dungeons and Dragons, but most fantasy based on stereotypes? The answer is hell yes. And it should be based on stereotypes because we're going to discuss what happens when it's not based on stereotypes. So if you look at, for example, Lord of the Rings, the orcs are inspired by the Germans. It's based in the experience of Tolkien from the World War. But if you look at Total Warhammer, the orcs are inspired by the British soccer players. So the type of person that is not very well educated, but likes to group around with other individuals and have a fight and stir up stuff and drink a lot. Like that's what it's based on. So if you look at most fantasy settings, they take certain stereotypes of the human existence and they create these races that are very stereotypical. So for example, in Star Trek, you have the Vulcans, which are only driven by logic and they suppress their emotions. You have the Klingons, which are traditionalists and they like combat and they like to fight. And then you have, in fantasy settings, you have the elves, which are incredibly intelligent and they're very arrogant and what have you. And what this does is that it creates drama. Because when you have a story in a setting where you have like all these stereotypes based on different races, and like in Lord of the Rings, you have a group of a hobbit, a wizard, a dwarf, an elf. Well, they have to overcome their differences. They have to put away their animosity and they have to work together in order to accomplish that goal. And that is what it makes for a really interesting storytelling. Or in Star Trek, when you have like every single race having to put aside its difference in order to fight off the Borg or to fight off the Dominion. Like that creates drama, that creates tension, and it's why people love reading these fantasy books. Like when you read things, you're supposed to escape reality. You're not supposed to get more of the same progressive garbage, which needs to be shoved everywhere. Like it's so bad. It is so bad that literally every single TV show and movie and game that comes from the West is now incredibly predictable, to the point when I see a crap movie from Korea like The Kingdom, it's like a work of art. It is so wishy-washy. It is beyond beautiful because it's a breath of fresh air. It's the same thing with Witcher, the video game. It's not that these games are just spectacular and mind-blowing, but it's that it's finally something new. It's something refreshing. It's something different than the old mold, which needs to be viewed through the lens of social justice non-stop. And it creates boring and dull stories. Look at Picard. Picard is the perfect example of what happens when you remove the stereotypes from a sci-fi fantasy. What ends up happening? It's like, well, now you have everyone acting like a human. So the Vulcans are acting like humans. All the other races, like there's really like nothing miraculous, nothing extraordinary about Star Trek anymore. It's like literally everyone acts like a human. So like why even have like different races if everyone is going to act the same? What is the point anymore? So that's one of the reasons why it's important to have these stereotypes to create drama. But these people, they're not happy with it. Like they hate the fact that it even exists. Like they would remove it. Like I would like to welcome this guy into my Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And I could make a campaign where you're in a city and you have a wave of orcs that are coming in. And you can be the guy advocating for no borders. You can be the guy advocating to open the doors and let the orcs in. It would be an interesting campaign, and see how you deal with the other players and convince them that it is indeed the good idea for the village to open its borders and allow the orcs in. And not to mention, like, it's so interesting when you actually create good scenarios and good campaigns. I mean, it doesn't have to be black and white. You can actually have, a story about a marginalized orc living in a city, and you can interact with him and try to help him out or try to take him out of the city. Maybe, you can have a story about a group of refugees that are coming to a village, and you can be in charge of that village and realize, all right, well, if we let them in, chances are more will come, and we don't have enough food to do them. And how do you deal with the crisis? Maybe you go to a neighboring village, ask for help, or, you petition the king or something. Like, you want to remove all of that drama. You want to remove all of the things that would actually make a story interesting. For what? For what? To just destroy the IP? Because that's what you're going to end up with. You're going to end up with an IP that is very bland, that can't have any sort of like... I mean, like, the only... When I look at social justice activists on forums and the type of Dungeons and Dragons stories they do, it's always like either about some LGBT issue. It's like, oh, we're going to have like this gay NPC that's being oppressed by the conservatives, or something like we're fighting the Nazis. Like literally, that's it. That's it. And those are the only two stories. Like I'm fucking bored of these stories. Have something new. Have something refreshing. But they don't. They don't want to. And like this role playing as an orc would be really interesting. And it would allow me as a game master to create interesting characters, like again, the type of orc that was found since a kid and the villagers are trying to raise him, and you can have like a really interesting dynamic there whether or not the orc is beneficial for the village. You can have like a group of villagers that really hate the orc or whatever. You know, like, look, you can have like refugees coming into a city, into a village, and they find the orc. The villagers like the orc, but the refugees don't, and you can have like some conflict there, and it's up to the players to decide which side to side with. Like, you can have such amazing characters, and not to mention like role playing as an orc would also be really interesting. But no, like, no, that isn't. Not to mention the thumbnail that I showed is how Japanese people view orcs. So it's really like, this is why everyone hates social justice activists. Like, this is why you're hated, because even if you were to change the IP and fit it your narrative, you're not going to change the world in any way. Like, you are just obsessed about what people do in their free time, and you're against human rights. You're against free speech, but most importantly in this case, you're against freedom of expression. Like, you don't like the fact that some artist expressed himself like that. You're going to make the life miserable from someone that works at that particular company because you do not agree with something that he did, which has always been the case in Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, Dungeons and Dragons was always based on stereotypes. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the comment section.